And I thank the speakers for finishing 13 minutes early. So can Martin, Sadaf and Peter come up? Okay, any questions? Stephen.
This is one for Sadaf. You said in your talk that their portal is using sort of open protocols and could integrate with other things. It's obviously important for where I'm coming from. But I asked that question in a meeting, you know, a year or so ago, and at that time, they said, well, it's really sort of much more kind of internal, you know, folders and all the things. So is that developed? Is that changed?
So, I don't know whether you have had a look at this open portal link. It's recently been up and running. And yeah, so that is the idea that, I mean, currently, of course, it talks to different border instances. But the idea is it should be able to, so we will be able to do our
You've got a published protocol I can look at.
Yeah. So I think that is something I would be very, very much interested if you are up to it. And so let's connect with Christopher, yourself, and us to get some feedback on that. And yeah, my understanding is this is at least in the border side that has already been upstreamed for other projects. But yeah, definitely we haven't tried ourselves and talking to any other systems. But
Who had input on that?
yeah, but thank you very much.
Next question. Over here. Bristol person, I think.
Hi, James Hunterback from Bristol Centre for Pacific. I actually have those questions, but I don't want to be greedy, so let's ask another question. The question is something that's sort of related to the project that I'm doing. I'm on the NFCS, which is looking at sort of federated APIs for data movement. One of the things we've sort of been struggling with or thinking of is in terms of how this relates to federated identity. And my question is, how important is shared identity or shared identities for federation? So you can think of us having like a single, so we're talking about in ELIXIR as having a single identity which is recognized across different sort of federated entities. But you can also federate without having necessarily a shared identity and just having trust between those entities, or trust in or sort of delegated authorization between those entities. And I wondered, to what extent is having a shared notion of identity important for large-scale federation like we're talking about?
Peter.
So I'm in the strange situation in my European projects. I have a single password and a single user account I use for everything, but I now have multiple federated identities in these single sign-on systems. So I have a My Access ID identity, a Life Science Login identity. So it's probably not crucial. The individual identity is probably not the most fundamental thing. You know, getting rid of multiple passwords was good. What becomes more important with your projects at scale is probably this thing that we haven't probably solved yet, the project identity, because probably your permissions around a big data set that you're moving are associated with a project and all the members of that project. And that's probably more important than being able to, if you're going to be assigning access rights to an individual at both ends of the activity, you're going to be doing that anyway, whether it's the same identity or not. But if you're going to be assigning access rights based on project, then the knowledge of the project being the same project, and then the members of the project being the same members of the same project, that's probably more important when you get up to big scale. It's useful to have a shared notion of identity, but if multiple people are using it, they're interacting with it multiple times, it hasn't saved you so much. But a shared project, that would be really useful.
So what you're sort of talking about is less a shared identity and more sort of portability of authorization policy.
It's the portability or the shared service that describes your virtual organization, including those relations between the people and the project. So yes, it becomes the authorization.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think when you think about shared identity, it sort of depends what it is. So you don't always need a common identifier, but you do need each of the systems that are talking to each other to have a persistent like identifier link to the other systems. And it's just a lot easier if you like if you can agree on one of those as the thing everybody shares, but it might not be possible depending on the systems you're connecting. But coming to your thing about permissions, like, so one of the things I noticed on yours is that your slides was that your sort of, you don't have a single service for who can do what with what. You have those as a distributed set of things, and synchronization of those, like how do I know, like, yeah, you know, how do you sort of route those? How do you decide kind of when you're kind of going to update your local sort of mapping? What does that mean to me? It's a sort of super interesting question. I'd love to hear.
So it's clear in our system that we're going to have many attribute providers. So in that case, you will need a shared identity. How exactly you don't need it? You will need it because you're going to be assigning people into the membership of groups. Now it becomes complicated because particularly in high assurance environments, you also want to be able to switch off people's ability to do something. So it becomes critical that the sign-in identity becomes your institutional identity in case you get fired and lose your right to do that. This is a problem because a lot of people want to use ORCID as the researcher identifier. Well, if I get fired, I'm still going to be using the same ORCID tomorrow. Well, probably have better things to do, but yeah. So it becomes quite complicated. You want to have a single researcher identity. You want to attach authorizations based on a project and to that single identity. But then you want to make sure that that person is still the employee that they were when they joined that activity as well. So it becomes more and more complicated, but it's certainly not the case that there's a single, well, JM may argue, but there's probably not a single European agency who's willing to do this for every Canadian in your project.
I mean, I would mention like at least two scenarios where, just to kind of reinforce what is already been said. So you could imagine people having multiple jobs and they may have, like, for my exercise, the email is the identifier. So just imagine, so you will be in a situation if one of your association is in a European country and one of your association is not in a European country, but you have access to a project and you need resources in the context of that. So we need to consider that. We cannot force people to have one job and one affiliation. That is, I think the thing we are struggling, as you already know, and BRICS, is when you bring entities that are not part of my society. I mean, this is something we are struggling with. It's good that we have had a lot of interest from industrial partners to use Isambard AI, but that poses us a question. How do you provide? So there is we call it identity of last resort. But just imagine who is going to, because some companies may be there for decades or centuries, but in the case of AI, companies come and go all the time. Who is going to provide this assurance and trust all these things? So it is a very complex or complicated thing, and it goes really even more slowly slow when you go in the EU or outside EU framework, and also the data protection, health data, when you go to Switzerland and other, it's just a really big. I think so. In that context, I think the systems should allow interoperability. We should not build a system that excludes. There will be edge cases, so we should not design or devise rules for edge cases, but we need to really design a system that can deal with. And some of these are problematic edge cases, which the ones we are talking about. So yeah, there is always centralized systems are easy to design, easy, but they are not sustainable at scale. So we need to live with the mess.
Okay, living with the mess. Next question. I think Laura.
Just an open question to the panel, and perhaps a not technical one. What do you think are the key things that you, when working towards federation, what made it successful, and what would you do again when setting up a new federation?
So we haven't successfully set up a project, but it's it's maybe the way to think about it is it's a way to easily set up very small federations. And I think we've got to the point where we know it will work, at least for the children's context. I'm quite confident it will work for UK Biobank. And at least the King's folk seem pretty confident it will work for them. And the key thing there's two things I think we said. We don't want the infrastructure provider to have to become a party to the data sharing agreements. And that's kind of the problem we set ourselves to solve. And so the two tricks that we think work for that, at least in these contexts, are, well, can you push the governance onto someone else's computer in a way that you're comfortable with, as the organisation holding the risk, and that the organisation who gave you the data is comfortable with, and the public for some of these data sets. And then the other is, can you partition those responsibilities and the things you're doing sufficiently well that when you come in to a grouping of folk using the same sort of system, you only have to do your bit to get access to everybody who's done their bit on the other side. So as a TRE, we're hoping if you come in and you're comfortable with the default set of things that supercomputer provides the same thing to do to help with security, then you just have to go, okay, I'm happy with that. I'm happy that I can deploy my bit and understand how to manage that. Now, I should be happy to accept the standard terms of use to any sort of supercomputer provider that's done their bit. And similarly, if you're a supercomputer provider, when you come in, you can say, well, I'm going to make these promises, I'm going to do them differently than some other people have, and I'll write that down, and I'll tell you that that will be something my auditors might ask me about. And now any TRE provider who's happy with other people who've done that should be happy with me. And I think that's the key trick, right? And I think this is what your centralized collaboration consortium agreements is doing. You're trying to kind of get rid of all these point-to-point sort of things that are like itself, that you sort of scale badly, sort of n squared or worse, with something that just scales with n, one of the n's in fidget.
I would not claim success in any case. I think it's a process, but I'll give you an example just to see in all the presentations we've heard and I'm part of NFCS. So I'm really hard in the way people approach this thing, because as I said, for me, federation was a means to an end. The end of the vision was the single pane of glass. If it would have been achieved in a different way, that is kind of other. There would be. But the very concrete example I will give and maybe leave something open. So if you look at the way I work in a European project for Supercomputing Sites Federation, I also, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, was involved in EOSC when it was kind of wobbling a bit a few years ago, maybe still. And but so we learned from those experiences, what didn't work kind of thing. So if we look at just specifically for airport or airportal, one of the fundamental things we decided was we keep the things we agree on to a minimum. And it is a very big, so it means we say no a lot of time. Because it's, as you grow, as you scale, it becomes more and more difficult. So we're using the same technologies as the European HPC Federation platform. We will have a wonderful talk from them tomorrow. So we are using MyXSID, we are using Vault and other things, but the implementation is so very different because the programmatic needs there are different because it's the European environment and other, they have a different approach to allocation, to access, to centralizing certain things, which I think in the UK environment and ecosystem, the way we are funded, the way we are scaling and or not, we need to keep it much more fluid. So experience kind of matters a lot. Being humble is very, very important. I know I don't know how to say it like that. Yeah, and yeah, so depending on your programmatic reasons, I mean, I think the model you presented, it works perfectly for Rosalind Franklin, and it will, I'm pretty sure it will be very successful as you extend it to the other environment. And yeah, so I think the goal or the vision should be very well articulated. So we are not doing some policy work for the sake of policy work. We are not doing governance for the sake of governance, and we are not doing definitely technology for the sake of technology.
I would say one key thing about the new shape of EOSC and the federated EGA and ELIXIR in general, if any of those count as successful federations, is it's important that they're not franchises. You know, you're just given a handbook and you say, you're going to do all of this, and you're going to do it exactly like it says in the handbook. No university department or IT department is going to choose to do that. And all of the successful bits of federation that we've got, give the nodes, the members of the federation, enough autonomy to do what it was they came to join the federation to do. And everything else is, well, put it this way, nobody likes to do boring things or difficult things or to spend money. So if the federation does the boring, difficult things for free, then people will join the federation. So those core federation services, people will use them if there's a motivation. But the individual members of the federation still need to have an identity and a reason to be there. I think that is important.
Okay, one more question. Rob.
Actually, picking up slightly on Peter's last point there, and from a conversation I was having earlier on today. So, are we clear why we're doing federation? From the researcher perspective, perhaps we are, but from the service provider, where are their incentives to do all this extra really hard work? Do we need to think about, the incentive structure? You touched on it just there. I think, Peter, if you can persuade people that the federation is going to do a whole pile of horrible stuff they don't have to do, great, there's an incentive to do it. But without that, why are we going to do it? Thoughts around the incentive structure, perhaps for providers rather than researchers.
Sadaf.
Yeah, so
Do some work.
I didn't want to do identity management, it's like what? I want to do supercomputing. AI is an interesting work. I mean, it's like just really never made sense to me. But it is a valid point, and I think I add a couple of bullet points in the context of AI, AR, how it benefits like Cambridge and ourselves, because it provides a consistent view. So we are not having bilateral relationships with the mothership or whoever is the owner and other thing. But this value calculation or proposition would look very different for different sites and service providers. So for BRICS, when it started, we were kind of in a very greenfield situation, and in experience and other things, I had, let's not do this, let's not do that because it's going to fail. And Cambridge, they were in a transition. But yeah, if you have an established environment, it works. Why break it? Is the right one. So yeah, the answer, what I'm suggesting is the answer may look different for different reasons, but let's just take bringing a new service, PRE. I can think of quite a few reasons why people would want to build on the bridge or a similar environment, because what's the point doing all this work again if you have an architecture or a reference architecture that works on public cloud, you have a reference architecture that work in, cloud-like HPC type of environment, and you're not getting additional money to do that. So there is some reusability and reconfigurability you would gain. But I personally think if you have already so much work to do, your things are working, there is definitely not going to be, if someone, as I showed in my slides, if someone like our funders do not say, yeah, you will get this money to build your next shiny piece of whatever kit, but you ought to do that, people are not likely to do. So it's a very much also a leadership question, I would call it. So the answer is not simple. In my case, I have greenfield, and at the leadership level, we had a very strong conviction that this is, don't build something that is already being built and already been done, and it's not your competence area to provide that service. let it be done by my access ID or whoever. They know what they are doing. They have competent experience, or TRE provider for information governance. Why reinvent the wheel kind of thing? But I could imagine the answer would be quite different or different. And fortunately, and that part didn't directly come from, I think in the UKRI, that's why we are funded in NFCS. There was this idea federation should be there, but it's not very well articulated that why we are having this network plus. But yeah, for some reason, I think in a very organic way, in the AIR type of roadmap, they crystallized it quite well why they would focus not only us, but also AIR cloud provider to plug into that model, because they know what visibility they have in capacity and resource management. So it may be, and how they will incentivize them, I have zero idea, as a service provider. So yeah, that's kind of my personal view, because throughout my career, sometimes it was top down, sometimes it was bottom up, sometimes it can be a combination.
Yeah, I would say it's more effective as a push from the bottom up. And so what's the incentive for doing extra work of joining a federation? You're going to get more users. Well, who here wants more users on their HPC system? I don't know. It's difficult to measure, but it's impact. So I'm a small provider, but I can become part of something bigger. I'm going to be part of wider conversations, or I'm going to be part of Europe-wide projects instead of national projects. And this is the driver. Why do my German cloud providers want to make their cloud available to Portuguese researchers? The German government are not enthusiastic about just making sure that CPUs are getting used. They're happy to see that Germany is providing a resource that everyone else in Europe is happy to be part of. So it's quite hard to quantify this and to justify a lot of the activity, but I think the answer must lie out there somewhere.
Okay, thank you. I'll end with one anecdote. I'll abuse my privilege as chair. To answer Rob's question, really, 30 years ago, when I was a young postdoc here in Bristol, and it's a great place to work. I only left Bristol because I was getting married. I recall running workflows from my Sun workstation that went between the Zeus supercomputer at Bristol, as it was called then, and the J90 Gray supercomputer at RAL, and another machine that was in Cambridge. And I ran a very complex workflow between the four, each element doing very different things. Within 2 years, that world was dead. And the reason I put so much effort into getting this going again and getting Federation going again is that I want that world back. And it's as simple as that, because that killed and slowed down an awful lot of research and stopped it addressing complex problems. And so that's why I want it back. And on that note, I'll finish.